Hey guys, Sarah Pacaro. Today's video is about childhood emotional neglect, the signs and how to heal. So we are not only going to discuss the signs of emotionally neglectful parents, but also the signs of emotional neglect in children. This is a topic and subject that is near and dear to my heart because not only personally, but every client that I work with experience childhood emotional neglect at some degree or level. And it so easily leads to being in emotionally abusive, emotionally available, unavailable, and toxic narcissistic relationships. And those are absolutely soul crushing, devastating relationships to be in. And oftentimes they can be really difficult to not only be in, but to get out of and to completely transform and heal your life after, because you just feel like a shell of yourself. You feel so disconnected and so isolated from your real, true, genuine, and authentic self. So, not only is childhood emotional neglect something that I experienced, it is something that most people don't know they experienced. I sure didn't know that I experienced it. I was raised in a normal household, came from well-to-do parents, both graduated from college, had degrees, full-time jobs, took care of us, all of the things. So there was no reason why I should have ended up in a number and series of devastating and highly, highly toxic, emotionally abusive relationships with narcissists, but I did. So that is my sole purpose and passion now, is to help people and others who've gone through that as well heal, energetically heal, emotionally heal, spiritually, so that you can live your best life, live the life that you were destined and determined to. But not only is it within the narcissistic relationship, there are obviously wounds that need to be healed, but those started long before you entered into that adult relationship. Those started with your first adult relationships, with you as a child, what that relationship with the adults in your life when you were a child were like. So that is the point and the purpose of today's video, is to cover what childhood emotional neglect is, know the signs, and then make sure you stick around to the end, because we'll talk about what you can do to heal from that much more quickly than you think. So that is where we're going to go. Remember, if you like this video, to comment, share, subscribe so that you don't miss anything. And there are extremely helpful links in the description below this video that will take you to my free training and give you more information about transforming past pain to present power, my group supported program. So make sure to check those out after watching this video. So let's get into it. Childhood emotional neglect, or CEN, is what its acronym is and what it's otherwise known as. It is a type of emotional abuse. It is a type of emotional abuse that oftentimes goes unrecognized, unreported, because it's invisible wounds. It's just neglect. It's the absence of something. This is abuse that is oftentimes seen as maltreatment, but it's not always obvious, and few people know what the signs are of it. And you're going to recognize and realize this as we cover those signs in just a moment, that those are seemingly normal things for childhood. Those are normal ways for children to act and behave, but they are signs of childhood emotional neglect, because being emotionally neglected can be such a crushing, devastating experience, an experience that crushes and devastates the soul and leaves little seeds of doubt and belief or disbelief in oneself. And those are the seeds that grow, and you end up with having these extremely deeply rooted beliefs about yourself as an adult. So not only does this form of childhood trauma and abuse affect the child's sense of oneself, it affects everything. It affects their capacity to trust themselves, to trust anyone else. It affects their ability to build healthy relationships, because their first foundational relationships were unhealthy, unsupported, and missing key components to develop this healthy, well-rounded identity of oneself. So it leaves lasting psychological effects. And those don't just magically go away when you become an adult and you turn 18. They affect every relationship that you have from that moment on. So what is childhood emotional neglect? What is the definition of it? Well, CEN is the parents or caregivers. It doesn't have to be a biological parent. It can be, if you're raised in a foster home, it can be step parents, it can be grandparents, whoever is your primary caregiver. Yes, this can occur with other adult relationships that child has, but generally speaking, it's with the primary caregiver, and it's with that primary caregiver's failure to meet that child's emotional needs, specifically during the early years. Those needs and all of those beliefs are in the foundation of their identity is formed very early on. Some say 0 to 5, some say 0 to 7. I mean, that's debatable, but they are formed early on. And what it means is it involves unresponsive, unavailable parents, limited emotional engagements or interactions between that adult or that caregiver and that child. Every child has the need for emotional support, for emotional connection, for attention. And when those needs are completely ignored and invalidated, it leaves a lasting mark and impression on a child. So CEN also, of course, clearly occurs when the primary caregiver exposes the child to extreme domestic violence or allows the child to engage in behaviors that are maladaptive, and then refuses to allow that child or give that child the ability to seek support, to seek treatment for those emotional problems, and just doesn't provide them with an adequate or healthy structure. So when the child is acting out and just angry all the time, and that parent just screams back at that child instead of realizing something is off here and doesn't support them in getting help or treatment. So with that said, I mean, here's a caveat, and here's where it stemmed from for me. My dad, he traveled a lot. He traveled a lot growing up. He traveled a lot for work. And so it was in his absence that he wasn't available emotionally for me to connect with. He wasn't available physically, to give healthy forms of physical touch, like a hug or a kiss. And my mother was left feeling and carrying the weight of having to support the family, right? Do all of the things around the house. And she was burnt out. She was overwhelmed. She was stressed. And therefore, she was also emotionally unavailable because she was processing her own things, and then leading to infidelity within the marriage and then a divorce. So my entire childhood, I was left, I can only speak for myself, feeling unemotionally supported, and that I had no one to talk to, feeling completely alone. And then I had other friends who, I didn't understand what was happening as a child. No child does. Every child thinks that what they are experiencing is normal, because how else could you? And when you are a child, you internalize it. If you feel this way, it's because there must be something wrong with you. You lack the ability to fix it or change it or make it better, especially when you look at the caregivers in your life and you love them and you want them to be happy and healthy as well. And maybe you go out of your way, because people pleasing is developed early on. If that's a trait or tendency that you have, it's developed early on because you see the caregivers in your life who are struggling and who are suffering, and you want to step in and you want to fix it and change it for them, and you can't. Then you're left feeling incapable, feeling unable, feeling unworthy, feeling that something is wrong with you, because you will go to great lengths, extents, and efforts to put in that time and energy into changing the environment and changing the situation. And you can't, because you can only ever change yourself. And that's something that most adults have to learn after unlearning what they learned in childhood, because of the lack of what they needed and what they needed not being there. So there are many, many, many effects of emotional neglect when you experience it in childhood. One of the biggest ones is that you end up in emotionally unavailable and abusive relationships. You end up in relationships that feel like home, that feel familiar. So you will often connect with energetically and spiritually magnetized to these people who have the same emotional wounds as you. And you feel like, wow, I get you. I know you. I love you. You're my soulmate. You're my twin flame, whatever it is that you call it. But that's because your inner unhealed wounds match theirs. And so you feel like, wow, I found my soulmate. But what you have really attracted was your parent, one parent or the other, sometimes a combination of them. And it's weird to think that that's what we do because we don't marry our parents. But those inner unhealed wounds that you have will magnetize and energize and make you attracted to others who have the same, because emotional neglect is a psychological maltreatment. It's also one of the most prevalent types of childhood abuse because it's not overt. It's just seemingly normal, right? For parents to be distracted or, unavailable or dismissive and say things like suck it up, tough it up to a child who's hurting. And really, they just need to feel that they're heard, seen, and loved. But it's normal. I mean, we see it all the time. You go to a grocery store and you see it, right? So it's not this overt traumatic event or experience. Experiencing emotional neglect as a child is just as damaging as other forms of abuse. In fact, there are studies out there about CEN that indicate that it might have the most wide-ranging negative mental health impact among all types of childhood mistreatment. And it is associated with adverse physical effects, psychological effects, and educational outcomes. I saw this when I was teaching. It's actually what led me to what I do today, because I saw this in the educational system. I mean, one person, you're in charge of trying to help 30 kids learn at a time. And you see that there are some kids, those who do not have their emotional needs supported and met, they're not going to learn anything educationally because of the hierarchy of our needs. So there are short-term and long-term consequences of neglect, and those include, risk for childhood, internalizing their behavior, and if they feel that they're not good enough, if they feel angry, if they feel resentful, if they feel constricted in their ability to express inwardly, that is going to show outwardly. And in the educational setting, when that child is coming up, it's going to cause delays in different types of development. It's going to cause delays in emotional development, delays in cognitive development, because their main caregivers are not demonstrating, modeling, and portraying what healthy signs of that are. So within the structure of our brain, there's the amygdala, and the amygdala is the part of our brain that is responsible for learning emotional significance. It affects the arousal state. It affects like the hormones that are flooding through our body, right? When you're experiencing stress, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, when all of those different chemicals are flooding through your body and through your system, the amygdala is the part of our brain that helps regulate that. And when a child is experiencing all of these adverse signs, that is impacting the structure of their brain and their functioning and their abilities, and that still impacts adults later on. So as a result, unfortunately, children raised by neglectful parents or absent parents, or parents who were not able to process in a healthy way their own emotions and then projected them onto the child, it has significant outcomes in the long term. So a child's perception of neglect is important as well. When a child perceives that they're being neglected emotionally, then they are twice as likely to project that later on as they're growing up. They're more than likely going to develop panic attacks, anxiety symptoms, panic disorder, phobias, extensive fears, PTSD, oftentimes CPTSD, because a parent being absent or coming home drunk and the child having to take care of that parent is generally not just a one-time thing, right? If it were a one-time thing, then the child would go, well, what was that? But this is something that happens over time, these parents not being emotionally available and being emotionally neglectful to the child's needs. So children who have experienced or were raised by parents who were emotionally unavailable or neglectful, they're much more likely to have poor academic performance. I remember when I was teaching third grade, there were a handful of kids who were just completely checked out. Folders went home, never came back, asked where the homework was, and I just got a blank stare. Like, I have bigger things to worry about. So poor academic performance, while they're sitting there in school, they're not thinking about the spelling test or the math problems that you're trying to teach them. They're thinking about what they're going to have to deal with when they get home, what they're going to walk into when they walk in that door. They're more likely to get into substance abuse early on, alcohol, drugs. Sometimes they see their parents are emotionally unavailable and neglectful because they are using substances. They're more likely to get involved with risky sexual activity because they're looking for that form of connection, and it's also a form of rebellion. That was me. They're more likely to attempt to take their life early on, because if you don't feel that you matter, that you belong, that you are important, you don't feel emotionally connected in a healthy way, your mind begins to tell you, what's the point? Nobody cares. So what's the point of being here? And leads you down a really, really destructive road and path. So emotional neglect is one of those things that's often passed down. It's generational or transgenerational. And this comes up a lot in my sessions with clients, in the transformational healing sessions, that you realize, wow, my parents treated me this way because they didn't feel lovable. They didn't feel good enough because they were treated that way. And actually, it was worse for them. And they can recall experiences where they hear, you've got it so much better than me. You should be so thankful. You should be so grateful. And realized this was something that was occurring generationally. So parents who were neglected and emotionally abused and had emotionally unavailable parents themselves, they tend to adopt similar parenting styles when raising their own children. So it's unfortunately one of those things that gets passed down generationally until you become the one that says, no more. I am going to be the one to break this generational curse by healing myself, because you can't make your parents heal. You can't make anyone else heal. You can't change or fix anyone other than yourself. So unfortunately, it is one of those things that gets passed on and gets passed down. So let's get into the signs of it. How to know, because it's not like physical neglect or abuse. It doesn't leave visible bruises or scars. It leaves invisible inner scars and wounds. And despite the differences between physically neglected experiences and emotionally neglected experiences, there are similar patterns and behaviors to look for. So there are similar signs. So let's get into those. The signs of emotionally neglectful parents. Well, if you were raised by them or emotionally neglectful caregivers, you will resonate with these signs. They speak to children in a very cold in a very unfriendly tone. And you've all heard that. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And they always say it in a way that's cold, that's belittling, that just cuts. It's like a knife that just cuts. And it's weird to say that words can be a knife that cut, but they do, because the tone is so cold and so uncaring and so unfriendly. Another sign of emotionally neglectful parents, that they're unresponsive to the child's feelings. They don't care. They don't show attention. They don't show any energy or effort to it. They can't be bothered. They dismiss the child's emotions. They're the parents that will leave their child just completely tantruming, even if it means that they're in a room and there's something in them that could hurt them. They'll just let them go. Right? Let them cry it out and let them figure it out and work it out on their own. They completely dismiss the child's emotions and what that child is thinking or feeling or experiencing that has them expressing those emotions in that way. Or they just don't talk to the child very much. The caregiver or the parent just ignores the child, just leaves them alone and lets them go off and play on their own. Sadly, oftentimes when this happens, the parent, when they do speak about the child, they praise the child for that. They say, oh, little Johnny is so good. Little Johnny just is so easy, is so just, he just kind of takes care of himself. No, I don't really have to do much. He's just an easy, quiet kid. He's so great. And little Johnny's ears are perked up and hears the parent or caregiver describe him in this way and thinks, wow, I'm actually getting positive attention from my parents. So I need to be more of this. I need to be more isolated, more quiet, more shy, more keep to myself, because that means they love me. But unfortunately, that means that the parent's not talking to the child very much. And then they feel that that's a form of a healthy relationship. So they get into relationships where someone, when there is an emotion that needs to be expressed, it's expressed by not talking about it. The next sign is that they spend very, very little time with the child, or they make them feel that they're unwanted. Like if the child does express that they need help or they need something, the parent, can't you see that I'm busy right now? And then that parent makes it all about them and makes the child feel bad for asking for help or support. So it's no wonder that emotionally neglected children grow up fearing asking for help or support, or almost feel a physical illness, feel sick when they have to ask for help or support, because growing up, that was the type of response that they received. They felt unloved, unwanted. They felt that they were a burden if they didn't understand something or needed help or support with something. The next sign is that there is very, very little affection that is shown or that is expressed. So many people that I work with, they say, I just don't ever remember my mom or dad hugging me or telling me that they loved me. Maybe once when I graduated, or sometime, like maybe one time they said, well, I'm really proud of you, but it just felt like they said it because they thought they had to say it. It didn't feel like they actually meant it when they said it. So there's very little to no positive feedback or praise. And even if it's given or delivered, the child doesn't feel like the parent means it when they say, I love you, I'm proud of you, look at you, you're incredible. They very rarely will say that. So they also don't see or experience positive social interactions. This child doesn't grow up, in a loving household or community where there are a lot of positive social interactions. If there are, it's again, like what I said before, with being praised for just being quiet and keeping to yourself and being so independent. And so this child grows up and becomes ultra independent and doesn't ask anyone for help or support. Well, no one in the world can do everything themselves, but there's a fear there's a phobia, like we talked about earlier. You can develop a phobia of different things, and you can develop a phobia of asking for help. The parent is so cold and disengaged. An emotionally neglectful parent is completely disengaged and uninvolved in the child's life. So this doesn't necessarily mean both parents. This can be from one parent, where one parent is completely checked out. Maybe it's just mom who takes you to all of your events and practices, and dad never shows up for any of your games or practices, never shows that he cares and is not involved in the child's life in any way. So the culprit of the emotionally neglectful parent initially comes from dad, but then also maybe from mom because she stayed with dad all that time. I don't know, just an example. There's a lack of interest in the children's activities. They just don't care, or when they're there, and you see this a lot these days, they're like this. And the child is wondering, hey, did you see that? Look, did you see what I just did? And the parent goes, oh yeah, that was great, honey. And if you watch, I see this all the time. If you watch, the child shuts down. They have a moment of, my mom or dad doesn't care. And then they begin to not care about themselves. That is emotional neglect. It's so easy today because of these devices right here. Or the parent persistently and consistently finds fault within their child. This happens a lot, and it comes up so much in therapy sessions where the child is truly trying their best, is giving it their all, is putting in their best effort. And let's say, for example, the child brings home a spelling test and they got a 97% on it. And mom says, why didn't you get 100%? we studied, we practiced these together. I went over these with you. And the child immediately begins to focus on the 3% that they failed at, and completely negates the 97% that they did correctly. So when a parent persistently and consistently finds fault with their child, the child begins to do the same thing internally within themselves. They begin to find the faults within themselves, and they begin to ignore the rest, because that parent also ignores their child's cues for help with learning new things and with problem solving tasks. If the child is attempting or trying to figure it out on their own and really putting in great effort and kind of is, I'm afraid to ask for help. My mom or dad looks busy. They don't, last time I asked them, they got mad at me or they didn't want to help. And there's cues that this child needs help or needs support, and that parent or caregiver consistently ignores that child's needs for help. That is childhood emotional neglect. That's a sign of an emotionally neglectful parent. Or when the child fails a task and they don't make it. Let's just say they're playing soccer and the child gets the ball and runs down the field and they shoot and they try to score, but the goalie catches it. That parent who's emotionally neglectful offers no encouragement when a child seemingly fails or doesn't succeed at a task. They don't say, that's what it's all about. Get back out there. You did incredible. Did you see how well you ran? There's no encouragement. There's just, why didn't you make the goal? Or just nothing, just complete ignoring of it. Another sign of emotionally neglectful parents is verbally aggressive discipline, and it's over the top. It's not something that matches what happened. So say that the child missed the soccer goal and the parent is verbally aggressive and disciplines the child for that. And sometimes they do that publicly, and then the child experiences public shame, not just shame where they already feel bad enough because they didn't make the goal. The parent was watching, the entire team was watching, and now that parent's being verbally aggressive and disciplining that child because they didn't make the goal. And it's not something that even matches. Like, every parent should say to the kid, it's okay. Oh my gosh, you did amazing. Good job. Let's get back there. We could practice more if that's something, to practice more. And you're not going to make every goal. That's just, nobody makes every goal. And instead of being positive, the parent verbally and aggressively disciplines the child. If the parent is addicted to substance abuse, if they are abusing alcohol, if they are abusing other substances, and chemically they're completely checked out, they're not going to be able to attune to that child's inner needs or emotional needs or even physical needs at that point. So an emotionally neglectful parent is also one who's addicted to substances, and also to one who shows depressive symptoms. If the parent is always depressed and woe is me, and and I can't, because I can't deal, I can't X, Y, Z because I, right, am so sad and showing depressive symptoms, then that child is left to care for themselves and to work through that on their own. And then, like we talked about before, parents who suffered from childhood emotional neglect themselves in their own childhood are way more likely to pass that baton on to their children and to treat their children the same way that their parents treated them. That's why, if you have experienced it yourself, it is so important and so imperative to do the inner work to heal yourself so that it doesn't get passed on to the other people in your life. And it is never too late. I want to caveat that and say it's never too late. If you have children and they're grown, they're always looking up to you. You're always needing and wanting and desiring the love of your parents, even if you have realized how toxic and emotionally abusive and unavailable your parents were and you've got no contact with them. There's a part of this about making peace within yourself and really understanding it at the unconscious level, that sadly, even if they were addicted to substances, they did the best they could with what they had. Even if they were showing depressive symptoms, they were, with that, doing the best they could with what they had. What they had was very, very little. It wasn't very much. And so your best of something that's very small, unfortunately, is a very small best. So These are probably signs if you experience childhood emotional neglect yourself that you saw within yourself, or if you're wondering, oh my gosh, am I a parent who I know experienced that from my parents? Have I damaged my own kids? There are signs and things to look for. Like I said, you might have experienced these within yourself as a child growing up and are probably on your journey to working through them today. Attachment styles. There are many of them, right? There's anxious, there's avoidant. So in insecure, there's secure and insecure. An insecure avoidant attachment style, an anxious attachment style, a disorganized attachment style. In extreme cases, that is a sure sign of emotional neglect. Children who show passive aggressive behavior, children who show aggressive behavior and patterns with the parents, children who were isolated and withdrawn and don't feel safe to speak up or to express. I've worked with so many clients who, from a very, very young age and very early on, were showing extreme and significant signs of anger and aggression, and their parents put them in anger management classes very early on. Children who suffer from developmental delay and are not meeting up with or being a part of the average, right? There's a bell curve, but children who were delayed developmentally, that's because emotionally their needs are not met, so they're not going to care about the math and the reading like we talked about before. If there is a lot of hostility and anger during the parent-child interactions, there's a lot of negativity coming from the child towards the parent. That's a sign that there are feelings and emotions that are negative that are being expressed towards that parent. And the parent may not understand, because the parent maybe think, I do everything for you. What more do you want from me? I work, I do this, I do that, I do that. And that is a sign that there is childhood emotional neglect, a sign that something needs to change if you are a parent who wants to help support that child. If there is not a lot of positive social interaction, if you feel isolated, or if your child, self-isolates and doesn't really show any excitement in getting involved with other children, that is a sign of emotional neglect. If there's a delay in language development, if during free play or that kind of interactive, fun, imaginative play, there's a lot of anger towards the parent when the parent steps in and says, hey, I want to play, or and the child just no, or shuts down or expresses anger during that. And if they don't engage or get involved with playing with other children naturally, if they're in a supportive, healthy environment, are curious and want to be involved and want to play. But if emotionally they're shut down, they're going to be shut down when it comes time to express and play with other children as well. So then you'll notice poor relationships with others. You'll notice impulsive behaviors like aggression, hostility. You'll even notice inwardly they'll start to do things like I've even worked with children before, and they pick their nails, or they're an adult now who still picks their nails and bites their nails, even though they're bloody and bleeding and painful, because they're trying to feel. And sometimes that feeling of pain is better, of the physical pain is better than feeling the emotional pain. So things like that, like self-harm, no matter how big or small, show up because of the shame, because of the humiliation, because of the ways that that child blames themselves and has feelings of worthlessness, whether they express it or not, they feel it. Sometimes they try and mask and hide it because that's the only way they get positive reinforcement from the people around them, from their friends, from their family, from their caregivers. But you'll notice that they have attention problems, have a really difficult time focusing on one thing. Obviously, there's terminology for this now, ADD, ADHD. They have much higher rates of disassociation. I work with so many people who now are adults who know that they disassociate, who know that they emotionally disconnect from themselves in order to not have to feel that, but are ready to heal and feel that now. There are signs, like if your child is explaining conduct disorder, symptoms of that, that is a sign that they're experiencing emotional neglect. If they have a really difficult time recognizing feelings or recognizing hostile situations, and they don't really seem to be bothered by it if it seems to be normal for them. And then obviously signs of Anxiety disorder, panic attacks, depressive disorder. If you, when you were younger, or your children now are showing signs and symptoms of that, that's also a sign of childhood emotional neglect. And self-soothing behaviors, like we talked about before, the nail biting, other things that the child does that are self-soothing behaviors. If you were a child who would do self-soothing things like thumb sucking for a much longer time than is quote unquote normal, that was me. Those are signs of childhood emotional neglect, when they're doing things to self-soothe because internally they don't feel soothed or regulated, and so externally they're trying to give themselves what they need that they haven't got emotionally. They're trying to give themselves that physically. So if a lot of rocking or OCD type behaviors, I work with a lot of people now who are adults that have OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, because that does become a self-soothing regulation and mechanism to try and soothe the dysregulation that they're feeling internally and emotionally. It's just presenting outwardly, externally, and physically. So those are signs and symptoms of emotional neglect, childhood emotional neglect. So how to heal from it? Well, you've got to feel it to heal it, right? You can't continue to avoid it and mask it, because it's internal and it needs to be felt in order to be healed. They're inner wounds, so they're invisible. You can't see them with the visible eye. They're inner unhealed wounds, taking the time to go through the journey to heal them. And that's exactly what we do in my program, Transforming Past Pain to Present Power, because it is pain from the past. It's pain from your parents' past. It's pain from your past because it was passed on to you. And you inevitably and unfortunately will pass it on to others in your life if you don't do the inner work to heal it. So consciously, there are things that you can do, and unconsciously, that is where the juice is to transform and change and reprogram and rewire the belief system about yourself because of those emotionally unavailable and neglectful experiences. So to subconsciously transform those beliefs that you're undeserving and that you're unworthy and that what you want is not available to you, that you're unlovable. All of those are unconscious beliefs about yourself. So the program is two-part, right? Working on restructuring, reprogramming, rewiring the unconscious beliefs that you have about yourself, while going through the conscious exercises and activities to understand it at a conscious level and what it was that was lacking, that wasn't there when you needed it the most, and then going through the process of giving that to yourself so that you can live a life that you love. So when you are ready for that, make sure to check out the links in the description below this video and schedule a time for us to connect if you want to, or just hop on over into the program and we'll see you in there.